So if you go into your accounting department and then take a look at your income statement, you're going to see something like this. So you're going to have your sales less the cost of goods sold. And by the cost of goods sold, I mean things like raw materials, factory, basically the cost that you incurred to produce those goods. So if you subtract that from your sales, you end up with your gross profit or gross loss, depending on how much you sold. And the rest is going to be other expenses, which are going to be subtracted from that. So if you pay attention to the cost of goods sold, you realize a bulk part of that is going to be the resources that you used to produce whatever it is that you produced. Now, the cost of goods sold is going to be largely affected by the inputs, that is direct or indirect materials, that your business requires, which means that your purchasing portfolio has to be on point, lest the results be reflected in your income statement. So from a procurement point of view, you're going to have to ask yourself, how can a company guard itself against supply interruptions? What about economic changes resulting from the ever-changing technologies? One of the people who sort of worried about that, or rather tried to formulate an answer to that, was Peter Kraljic. In his article, which was in the Harvard Business Review in 1983, Kraljic wrote something along the lines of, purchasing function of an organization should be strategic if you intend to get the answers to what you've just talked about. Now, in this video, we're going to talk about the Peter Kraljic model. The Peter Kraljic model can be seen through the following 4 steps: purchasing classification, market analysis, strategic positioning, and action planning. Let us start with the first step, that is purchasing classification. As a procurement specialist, the first thing you have to do if you're using this model is to analyze whatever it is that you're about to buy, or rather analyze your purchases, whatever you're going to buy, let's say that, okay, in terms of their profit impact and their supply risk. By profit impact is what I'm talking about. Profit impact is high when the item adds significant value to the organization's output. Imagine you're selling fruits, or rather, imagine you're selling juice. Now, the cost of fruits are going to affect your profitability. The same thing can happen if you're a logistic company. The cost of fuel is highly going to affect your transportation, assuming you're using fossil fuel. Now, the second thing you want to look at, as far as step 1 is concerned, is supply risk. Now, under that, supply risk will depend on whether or not the items you intend to procure are readily available in the market. So by analyzing your purchases from those 2 points of view, you're going to end up with the following quadrant. You're going to have leverage items, non-critical items, strategic items, and bottleneck. So the idea is just to understand your purchases from those 4 things. Now let's go over those ones one by one so that you can understand which strategy do you use in whichever case, or rather in whichever item you're about to purchase. The first one is non-critical items. These are items of low impact to your profit and their supply risk is equally low. An example in this category would be, say, the pens that you're using in the office. Think about it, okay? Whatever you're doing, okay, somebody will write something, your executives are going to write, your workers are going to write, whatever it is. But the quality of pen they're using, how does that affect your profit? So, see, that's the thing, okay? And the pens are not really that expensive and they're not that difficult to get. But you still need to buy them. And then again, you just can't say they're not going to affect my profit because they are going to add up to either the cost of production or they're going to add to the direct other expenses in your income statement. So the strategy to use here will be having standardized products and optimizing inventory levels, since you don't want to have a lot of these items, in this case, these pens, just lying around for no reason. The second category of items will be the leverage items. These types of items have high profitability impact and low supply risk factor. This gives the buyer an edge for greater returns. So the purchasing approach that you want to use in this setup, or rather with this kind of items, the leverage items, is to consider substitute products or alternative suppliers and placing high volumes. Now the third category of products, or rather items, the third category of items as far as the Kraljic model is concerned are the bottleneck items. This category is actually the opposite of the leverage items. That is, there's a high supply risk and yet there is a low profit impact. So what are you going to do in this case? So the suppliers are strong in this case, or rather in the case of these items. It sort of just goes back to the Potter's 5 forces. Okay? If there are less suppliers in the market, then it means that the suppliers have power as compared to the buyers. By the way, if you don't understand how the Porter's 5 forces analysis work, I did a video on that. I think I'm probably going to link it here, or whatever. But I did a video on that, so you need to check it out. But the idea is, anytime you analyze a market and realize that there are few suppliers and than buyers, then it goes without saying, they are strong, the suppliers themselves. So the items that are going to be found in this category sort of operate on such manner. So what do? The common solution here would be over-ordering when the items are available. The one thing you have to understand about items in this category, the bottleneck items, is that while in fact they don't really greatly affect your profit, okay? You'll still have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out where the suppliers are, which means you may not really be affecting your profit, but you're wasting your time. And that's just that, okay? Time is money. So when there are few suppliers, good. When you find those suppliers, make sure you over-order. That way you don't have to worry about buying those items in future. Now the fourth kind of rather items found in the Kraljic model will be the strategic items. So let's talk about strategic items. These are items of high profitability impact and high supply risk. Strategic items are pretty much the opposite of non-critical items, okay? They highly affect your profit, and then again, they are difficult to find. Given the critical nature of these items, they deserve the most attention from the purchasing department. In this category, you have few suppliers, and therefore you have to develop long-term supply relationship, analyzing and managing risk regularly, and also considering making the item in-house if possible, rather than buying them. If you're going to do one of those, what are they called? The buy or make decisions. This is the part where you start doing the make decisions, because if the suppliers are not there, and yet whatever it is that you're dealing with will, you really need it to produce whatever it is that you're going to produce. So you really don't want to have hope as a strategy here. You need a proper strategy. So making these things could be one of the strategies. Or alternatively is, whenever you find them, the suppliers, you make sure that you have a long-term relationship with them. That way you don't have to deal with supply interruptions. So all that falls under step 1 of the Kraljic model, which is purchasing, or rather, which is classifying your purchases. So now you've classified your purchase into the categories we've talked about: non-critical, leverage, bottleneck, and strategic items. Let's move on to step 2. The second step is conducting market analysis. Remember, you're doing all these things at your office or whatever it is that you're coming up with your strategic plan for purchases. So you have a list, or rather you have a quadrant showing the kind of items that you need. So the question is, are these items in the market really? Like, what exactly is going to happen in the market? So that's why you do your 5 forces analysis, if you want to use the Porter's analysis. So you sort of figure that one out so that you can understand the strategy you're going to use when you're dealing with these suppliers. Remember, it's one thing to have a strategy for purchasing the product. It's another thing to have a strategy to deal with the suppliers. Okay, this is what I'm talking about. Let's say you want to buy a car, okay? And you have a choice between an electric car and a petrol car, or a diesel car and a petrol car. See, the strategy that you're going to use when it comes to sort of maintaining that car is not the same strategy that you're going to use when you are negotiating with the sales agent. Well, as weird as that sounds, that is what I'm talking about, okay? So while you are sort of trying to classify your purchases, just trying to think about what you will do with that car. But the second stage, which is analyzing the market, means you're trying to come up with a strategy to deal with the suppliers, or in the case of the car, how are you going to deal with the sales agent? So basically, that's what we talk about in the Porter's 5 forces analysis, which is a video that you can actually check out. I already did that. So once you've analyzed your market and figured out where you stand, in the sense of whether you as the buyer are strong or the sellers are strong, the next thing to do is to move to step 3, which is determining your strategic positioning. Having figured out your bargain position and having figured out, having classified your purchases, you'll end up with something like this. So you're going to have your buyer's strength, you're going to have your supplier's strength. Either your strength as the buyer is going to be low, mid, or high. The same thing goes for the supplier. They're either going to be low, mid, or high in terms of strength. that will give you three strategies. You're either going to exploit your suppliers, you're either going to balance, okay, your strategy when you're dealing with them, or you're either going to diversify as a strategy. What exactly does this mean? Well, what that means is coming up with your action plan, which is step 4. So your action plan, as we've already mentioned, will come down to three things, okay? Either you exploit, which is step 1. So in this case, you're using power to secure good prices, long-term contract relations from a number of suppliers who will fall in this category. That way, you reduce supply risk. Remember, the question of whether or not to exploit your sellers or your suppliers will depend on your power in relation to their power, okay? If you have more power than the suppliers, good, you can exploit them. If they have more power than you, you're not going to exploit them. If you're evenly matched, then you move to step 2. Rather, you move to option 2, which is balance. So balance means taking a middle approach between exploration and diversification. So of course the question is, what exactly do you mean by diversification, which is the third option that you have. So diversification in this case will mean reducing risks by seeking alternative suppliers. For instance, you could, in case of inbound logistics, under your primary business activities, use a mixture of both road and train to get the goods if logistics is the issue. Meaning what? If you're having difficulty getting the goods to your place of business because the suppliers are few or the people who are dealing with transport are few, because that could be your problem. So with diversification means you could have some brought in by train, you could have some brought in by road, others brought in by air. The point is you're just trying to diversify your alternatives so that you don't end up getting stuck with one supplier who turns out not to be reliable. So remember, when it comes to Kraljic model, step 1, figure out what your purchases are, rather classify them. Step 2, understand what the market looks like. Step 3, figure out your position in that market. Are you strong or are the suppliers strong? And the last thing is to come up with an action plan, which means depending on your strength in relation to the supplier strength, you could exploit the suppliers, you could balance your power when dealing with them, or you could diversify. So if you have any question up to that point, let me know. Again, this video is just one of those questions that was asked by a member in our Facebook, rather in my Facebook group. So if you have any question, you can either ask it in Facebook, you can ask it via email, you can ask it via the website, zeritnetwork.com, or you can even ask it in LinkedIn. I'm Moses from Zerite Network, and I'll see you in the next video.